You're listening to Brandon Sports Talk, interviewing professional athletes and Paralympians and Olympians. And now for your professional athlete interview and your host, Brandon P. Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview the USA paracyclist Bryan Larsen. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to be here.
You. Can you talk about how you knew that you wanted to start competing in paracycling?
Well, probably it's easier to go back to the very beginning, before para. So I was actually an able-bodied cyclist for I think something like 20 years, or rather, sorry, like 17 years, um, before I was actually injured while racing my bike. So I started racing when I was 12 years old, and I was in a race in Northern California when I crashed and damaged some nerves in my neck that powered my right arm. And at the time of recovery, it was kind of like, hey, everyone tells when you're injured, right? You gotta set goals, set lofty goals, figure something out. And that's when I started to like have some discussions with a few other kind of para individuals, who pointed me to the fact that paracycling may be an opportunity for me. And so since I already knew how to ride my bike, and raced my bike for years, I was like, oh, maybe I could be okay at this para thing. And so all I had to do is figure out how to deal with my impairment and yeah, go after paracycling.
Of course, at the age of 13, what was that like starting out so young?
Um, it's awesome. I think back, I've been I think back like to that young eagerness and you go through highs and lows over when you've been racing for as long as I have. Um, and I think the one of the kind of cool things when you're young is you get faster really quickly. So there's a really solid positive um kind of loop, encouragement loop for most people, right? That like you go from nothing, if you start riding your bike at all, you get faster than you did before. And then if you ride a little bit more, you get a little even faster, right? That you like haven't even begun to like reach that threshold. And so yeah, to be young, you enjoy getting faster, you enjoy racing with your friends, and it is just that. It's friendly competition, and it's what I did on the weekends. It was like it became my social life as a teenager. When I was in junior high and high school, it was my weekend activity. It was my after school activity at the end of the day.
What was it like going to college and competing in club cycling?
So collegiate cycling was, or rather is, I think, a great program for any athlete. Any type of collegiate sport, especially in club sports, is a really good program. And the reason is because collegiate club sports, and not just cycling, but as a whole, it empowers the students to kind of take hold of their program. So, when I was there, um, I was actually the president of the club, but also racing. And then I had my friends who were racing and they were dealing with the sponsorship. And I had other people who were dealing with, fundraising or other aspects of the sport. And so it was really kind of a self-made program where, you were, and the program was as successful as you wanted it to be. Right. And I think that that's really, again, I think that I've always told people I learned more about real life, like post college life, by doing club sports than I did in college, like taking classes, because I had to deal with people, I had to deal with financials, I had to deal with like managing a group of people and teaching people and bringing them up to speed. Stuff that people encounter in their day to day jobs. I had to do that as like part of part of the program.
How did obviously your club level experience in cycling help you into becoming a professional cyclist?
Well, kind of like starting at a young age, um, a club athlete, there's less pressure. There's not no pressure because any athlete will tell you that there is always pressure on yourself, right? Um, but getting an opportunity to learn, and oftentimes club sports have a lot of kind of relationships with other ambassadors and other coaches and leaders who can kind of teach you without the pressures of being a professional athlete and traveling. um you know Professional in cycling world is loosely defined. In other sports it's very black and white, right? In athletics and cycling, there's so many degrees of categories that you race, and as you get better you move on to the next category. And there's times when you're not a professional but you're racing alongside all professionals, right? When I was 19, I got a race with Lance Armstrong, but I wasn't a professional at the time. I was just racing with Lance in the same race. But um, you get exposed to the people who are the best all the time. And I think that that's one of the cool things about cycling and club sports and all these kind of aspects is that you just simply um, you get to ride with and be a part of a sport where you can practice with the best. I can go for a group ride and train with a Tour de France winner, right? Um, you can't do that with football. Like imagine if you wanted to go and play like, oh, I want to go play catch with like Joe Montana. Like that doesn't happen, right? Like you can't really just like you can't do that. But in cycling it's kind of part of the sport. So that's pretty cool. So,
Of course, what was that experience like, obviously, getting able to cycle with Lance Armstrong?
well, like Lance is just one athlete, right? And he's got he has different there's people who look at him differently, right? Obviously through his checkered past, but being around people who made the sport their life is always inspiring. It's always grounding, and it's always something you can learn from. So whether you're racing with someone who's as well known as Lance or someone like that, or if you're just somebody who's lived and raced in Europe and they've done something that you haven't, you might as well learn from them. And I think that it doesn't really matter. Like I said in the sport, like there's so many degrees of professionalism. There's always someone that's better than you, and so it's always kind of cool to be able to have conversations. I didn't get to talk to Lance in that race. Like he was in another race. He was up way far ahead of me, right? But there's other pro athletes that I get to talk with and I get to chat with and I can send a message to on Instagram or Facebook or something and I can get a response from. And I think that that's really cool about this sport. Again, I'll imagine like messaging Joe Montana and being like, "Hey, can you give me some tips on how to throw the football better?" Like you're probably not going to get a response, right? But I can do that with other athletes in the sport and I can get responses from them. So it's kind of cool.
What has it been like, obviously, getting to represent Team USA and have Team USA on your chest?
When I was when I was like 15 or 16 years old, it was being a member of Team USA was like a dream. Like it was something that's all I wanted when I was in high school was to like wear a USA jersey and to earn it. You can go and buy a USA jersey on eBay, but to like earn it. Um, and I thought that dream was gone. And I figured, oh, okay, that thus is life. You don't get everything you want. And so to come back after my injury and to have an opportunity to be a member of Team USA and to go to a World Championships with a Team USA jersey on my back was like it was just icing on the cake. It was like to me it was truly like the story of like don't give up on your dreams, right? Because even despite adversity, even despite pain, even despite injuries and impairments and work and life and everything else that can come at you, um, there's still little gems that you can learn from. So it's that's really awesome.
Of course, for you, what was that transition like from going from cycling to paracycling and making that team to go to the World Championship?
Well, the transition was two things really. One, it was me trying to learn about my injury and my impairment, and the other was, um, of course, being good enough to make the team, right? And so those were the two stages. So stage one was I had to learn how to use my arm well enough that I could race my bike. At the same time, my injury and my recovery process all kind of started and happened during COVID, basically right before COVID. And so when I was getting ready to get back on the bike, everyone, that's when COVID happened and everyone was riding stationary bikes inside on Zwift and things. And so I was fortunate enough that I was able to be on my stationary bike riding with my friends who would normally be off, racing around the country. And I got to race with them on Zwift and ride with them on Zwift. So I was like lucky that I was surrounded by people during that time. And so I kind of, there was that piece of it, which was okay, get well enough that I could ride my bike. And then the second piece was get well enough so you can race your bike fast enough. Um, and that was a whole nother process because you're how do I say this, with track cycling in particular, it's very objective. Your performance is very objective. It's kind of like swimming, where if I set a time like, oh, you're going to do the freestyle and this is the time, it's pretty much like that's what you got to do. It doesn't matter who's swimming in the lane next to you. It's like, oh, that's a time. Other sports aren't quite like that, right? Like, oh, I won this football game. Well, it's like, well, what team were you up against, right? It's always like, who were you racing against in other situations? In track cycling, it doesn't matter. It matters less. Let's just say it's really a self-centric sport where your own performance is objective. And so where I'm going with this is I knew the level that I had to compete at, which was really good for me because I knew, okay, here's the target. Um, and it just became a function of chipping away at it. And, to be honest, I was so focused on that I didn't have to worry about anything else. Like I didn't have to think about other races I was doing or anything else because I was like, I just want to make the Team USA roster. Like that's all that matters. So if someone said, "Hey, I'm gonna go do this like fun ride or this other thing," there was like the distraction. It was easy to say no to distractions like that. You know. Instead, I was like, okay, well, no, I have to go do these intervals. Sorry. And so that's kind of like it became a process of just it became a process of finding a process. Really, is what it was.
Of course, during the pandemic, when obviously there was no cycling happening outside and stuff, what was it like, obviously, being able to cycle on a stationary bike versus obviously going out and cycling on a regular bike?
Well, I'm lucky because to be honest, I think if I had had my injury 5 years before, when these technologies didn't exist, it would have been a lot harder for me. It would have been a lot harder of a process. I would have been alone a lot. And when anyone will tell you if you're really struggling and you're trying to get through something, do it with someone else. They'll help you. And for me, riding a stationary with other people was the way I got through it with someone else. And we would do things. We could connect our phones and we would talk to each other just like we were riding side by side. So we would go and do these rides on a stationary bike, sweating like crazy inside and having a conversation just like we're riding outside. And that was like it's fun, and I still do it. I still enjoy doing it. even though I can ride outside now, it's still a safe and controlled environment. And like I said, I can ride with someone who's 500 miles away, like they're right next to me. So that's pretty cool.
What was the experience like getting to travel to France for the World Championship in 2022?
It was a blur, I'll tell you that. It happened so fast. So I was anyone who may be listening to this who knows me, maybe I don't know, will know that I put a lot of pressure on myself. Um, I'm pretty driven. I'm self-driven at that, and I kind of don't take BS on myself. And yet I also set myself up for that stress oftentimes. But when I got there, it was really about doing the job. Um, I didn't really get to take it in, and I was terrified. I was like, hey, I have to be a professional here. I have to do a job. I'm representing Team USA. Like this is important. Um, and it wasn't until I was pretty much like sitting in the ready area, which is like a little bench before you go to the start line, and I was sitting there, and I had like a rush of positivity, kind of like I would describe it, that flew over me. And it was basically, um, I looked up and I remember like looking up at like kind of they have like a scoreboard kind of thing. And I remember seeing it said World Championships. And I was like, then I looked down and I saw I was wearing a Team USA jersey. And it was kind of one of those pinch me moments. And then it was just a matter of like getting through it. Like it felt so positive, it felt so controlled, and it felt like I actually actually was able to get the most out of myself, even under all of the stress of travel and all these and jet lag and all these other things. Um, but it was amazing. I mean, it's great. There are far worse places for your hobbies to take you. I'll tell you that much. But Paris, France, is a pretty cool place that you know to get a trip to.
Of course, while at the World Championship and being in Paris, France, did you compete on the same area that the Tour of France was? And how was that like?
Yeah, so we were racing on a velodrome just to the south of Paris, and that indoor track is what will be used for the Paris 2024 Olympics. And that in itself is pretty cool. If you think about it, again, I'm going to keep using analogies. Imagine getting to go play imagine getting to go play football and play catch on like a where the Super Bowl stadium, right? Imagine that. Like that would be amazing. Or to go play hockey wherever, like some NHL stadium. That's what it was like. I got to go in there. I gotta see what the feel was like on the inside, not from like the spectators, right? I gotta see what it's like on the inside, what the locker rooms look like and smelled like, and what the infield looked and smelled like, and the sounds and senses of the rush of what's happening before you go on the race. And it's just like you can easily visualize like oh my gosh, in 2 years time the Olympics will be here and the Paralympics will be here, and those stadiums will be every seat will be taken, right? And so if you think it's loud now and you think there's the cheering's loud now, like imagine with a full stadium what it's going to sound like. So yeah, it was again a very inspiring opportunity. Again, worst places to be, that's for sure.
Of course, during that time, were you starting to think about making the Paris team to go to Paris for the Paralympics?
Yeah. um you know like I said before, the track cycling is very objective. Um, your performance is very measured and very calculated. Um, I've always wanted to be, before my injury, I always wanted to be an Olympian. Now I want to be a Paralympian. That's not going to change or go away. Um, Now it's about putting it together to go there. But these things aren't gifted, they're not handed out at all. And so you have to earn a spot. you have to earn it, and there's no, like with track cycling, you can't fake it, right? You have to do a certain time, and you have to be good enough to show that you're not just good enough to like walk in the stadium. Like, you have to show that you're good enough to win a medal, is really what it comes down to. Like, that's how you make it on the team, is to say everyone who's on the Team USA roster is there because they're capable of winning a medal or winning a gold medal specifically, right? And you don't get to go there to finish 10th place. So, yeah, so I mean, obviously we have work to do. Um, but I think the goal is always there. Um, and I have that number in my head every single day I ride. What do I need to do? That number is in my head every single day. I do a ride. Um, and so it's really about doing that. And World Championships was a great it was my first time at that stage, and I told myself, hey, go to World Championships and see what it's like, see if you belong there. Like, if are you good enough to, like, are you good enough, like, is this where you belong? And I think the answer is yes. But you know there's a lot of work to do. Just like in swimming, like a second takes a year to get a second, right? So to get a second faster. So we got to find like probably like 15 seconds. So I have to find like 15 seconds in 2 years. Um, so we have our work cut out, but no matter what, I think anything I learned from this journey in para is that, like, you can always keep getting better. Whether or not you're on the world stage, whether or not you're racing with a number pinned to your back, or you're just measuring yourself, against your previous self, right? How good are you today compared to how good you were yesterday? Um, so again, whether or not I make the world's team this year, next year, wherever again, um, doesn't detract from the fact that, like, I can continue to improve myself on the bike. And I still have lofty goals. I still want to make it to the Paralympics. I have other kind of stewing goals in my head that, like, that would put myself, like, um, on the world stage, right? But we got to figure out how to get there. So.
Throughout your career so far, how has it been like obviously getting to travel the world and compete in cycling, going to places like France and the Netherlands?
Um, Again, cycling is such a cool sport because I have traveled so much with this sport, and I have been to small little towns and big cities around the world because of my bike. Um and that's a really cool thing. So I have raced in. I wish I had the number. I probably should know the number, but I've raced in, I don't know, probably half of the United States. I've raced in Mexico. I've raced in Netherlands. I've raced in France. I've raced in Germany. I've raced in Belgium. Um, and I've ridden my bike in Croatia, Slovenia, Italy. Um, I don't know where else. Ireland. There's so many places that the bike has taken me, and I'm forever grateful for that. No question. Again, pinning a number on your back is only part of the experience. So being able to ride your bike, especially by yourself, like, it's really great to ride with people, but when you're by yourself and you're out, it's a very, like, it's a very zen state to be in. And it's kind of, it's really, I think it's really good for your mental health to kind of learn to be present while riding your bike. And it's always been described to me as that. It is just a zen. It's a zen state. So.
Who are some of the people that you look up to and inspire by?
Ooh. There's a few people. Um, in the cycling world, there's one individual. His name's Dan Bigham. Some would call me a fanboy. Um, but so Dan was he was a world record holder in the hour record. He's done he I mean his list of performances is long, much longer than mine. Let's just say that. But one of the coolest things about Dan that kind of inspires me is that he wasn't the most naturally talented, gifted individual. He was an engineer like myself, and he decided to apply his engineering mind to make him a really good bike racer, and that's something I'm trying to do right now too. So, looking at how he approaches problems, looking at how he approaches opportunities, and say, rather than, oh, I need to just pedal harder, he thinks about everything. He thinks about things that you would never think about because he says, well, maybe this could have an influence. And that's inspiring. So that's kind of what I want to do and what I like doing is really like to study the physics and the mechanics of cycling, and I could talk your ear off and everyone's ear off about the engineering that can go into any of these bikes, and even a fixed gear bike with one gear, it's insane how much you can test, how much you can change, and how much you can develop to make yourself go faster. So
Of course, being a new person and a rookie into the world of paracycling, who are some of the people that you've looked up to and got inspiration from? And have you talked with people like Samantha and Claire about how they got started?
I mean, yeah, there's like I think there's our Team USA roster at Worlds was each one of those individuals, like Clara Brown, Samantha Bosco, Chris Murphy, just to name a few, they were people who helped me since my injury. They were people who kind of opened me in with arms wide open. Chris Murphy was someone who was one of the first guys to encourage me to say, "Hey, you should probably do this. Like, here's the email of the person you need should send a contact to." Um, Samantha Bosco, I actually raced with her husband for years. Like since I was 18 years old, I raced with her husband. Um, and it's one of those, oh, we had a really good relationship, and then all of a sudden she was the most experienced one in the room because she's doing something that I am hoping to do. And so, there's not much I can say in those conversations. I can just ask questions, right? I'm just like, what do I do in this situation? Who do I talk to if I need this? How does this process work? Because to be honest, I've never been I've never been on a stage where I have to make a world's team, right? And what does the process even look like? Is it just I need to show up to this race and win? It's not quite as simple as that. Yes, but not as simple as that. Well, there's these other metrics and these other kind of ranking systems, and this is how they all work. And they were people who all explained that to me. Clara Brown was what is kind of one of the rider advocates, and uh, um, she's someone who's um, always been really cool to chat with. Um, and I mean, to be honest, that whole crew is awesome. I could sit down at dinner and sit next to or beside any single one of them, and at dinner time, and I would be excited. I'd be like, okay, who do I get to learn from tonight? And that's a really cool feeling, right? To be able to talk to someone. It's not like you don't have favorites, and I think that's like kind of a cool thing is to just to truly be inspired by and learn from every single one of your peers, especially when you're the rookie. Like, yeah, I've raced bikes for 20 years. Like, I know cycling, and I could tell you everything there is about cycling, but I don't know paracycling. So why don't you tell me what this is like, what I should expect? So, yeah, it was cool.
How is it like, obviously, getting to meet your fans and having them ask for your autographs and photos with you?
It's only happened a few times actually. You want my photograph? You want my autograph? No, I think I think the coolest thing is just I'm sure every professional or elite athlete will tell you the same thing, which is just picture yourself when you were a kid, right? And if I was 12 years old getting into the sport and I met me today, would I say I want to do this sport? And that's the only question you have to ask yourself. So it's just like hold yourself to that level. Like forget what the sponsor pitch you're supposed to say is. Forget what the forget that like ESPN interview style and just be a cool person that if you were your 12-year-old version of you met you, would they be like, "Wow, that was a an awesome experience." And would they print out that picture and tell their friends about it or show a photo to their friends and tell the story at school the next day? Um, and if the answer is no, you're probably doing something wrong, right? Maybe you're not in the right place. So that's the best thing I can do is try to inspire those types of people.
Of course, what are some of your future plans in the sport of paracycling?
So a couple. Um, I do want to make worlds teams again this year, next year, as many years as I can. I think once I got a taste of it, I loved it. It was amazing. It was an amazing experience. This year it's in Glasgow, um, Scotland, and so like I've never been. Like awesome. Could the sport take me somewhere where I haven't been again? Like that is awesome. Um, I'd love to make it, on a Paralympic team. That would be amazing. But like I alluded to earlier, I think there's a few other goals I have, such as an hour record. Um, and for those who don't know, this is a basically a 60-minute time trial. It's how far can you go in 60 minutes? And so I want to do this for paracycling, and I want to set a world record for the hour. Um, and I think it's doable, but it's not going to be easy. And so maybe that's a project for later this year for the fall this year. So I've already started kind of mapping out what that looks like, but that's something I'm kind of that gets me up in the morning. That's for sure.
What advice would you give those people that are in college that are looking to compete in college cycling?
Ride your bike as much as you can, um, but don't take it too seriously. Um, I think I think the best thing for any young athlete, cycling or not, is to create a personal process for the sport that you're doing. So what I mean by that is, oftentimes people think, oh, I just have to ride harder. Like we said earlier with Dan Bacon, right? It's like, oh, just pedal harder. Well, like what else can I do? Well, you can eat healthy and sleep well and take care of your equipment and all these other things, right? Um, and those things are often overlooked with a lot of younger athletes. They just think about riding hard, right? And they'll stay up late at night and do these things. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do those things. I'm just saying, the night before a race, maybe not eating donuts for breakfast and planning a little bit, planning ahead and bringing, healthy oatmeal or something like that is a better alternative. Um, and really all it comes down to is thinking ahead. So as a young athlete, I would say just think ahead. What do you expect yourself to need? What do you expect yourself to go through? And then plan for it. And each time you're surprised by something, just mentally catalog it and remember it, so that you can improve the next time around. Don't make the same mistakes twice.
What advice would you give people that are looking to get into adaptive sports and in particular paracycling?
Do it 100%. Cycling is any any sport for any individual, I believe, is therapy. Um, and especially those that are in a space where maybe they don't feel like they belong, right? Maybe they feel like their body is a little bit different than their peers. In paracycling, for example, um, you know, there's so many degrees of impairments that you can encounter, but one thing's true is that they all love the sport. And it's therapy and it's a rejuvenating energy for each and every one of them. So, you know, I think the most important thing is like people ask themselves is like, you know, am I good enough or do I belong in this? And the answer is like yes, because in paracycling especially, there's so many degrees of impairments. You're going to find where you belong, right? It could be under, they have classifications, right? So they have everything from category 1 to category 5 of impairments. Um, and you know, you're going to find out where you belong in that degree, in those kind of segments. Like, you know, if you're missing an arm, you know, you belong in this category. If you're missing a leg, you belong in this category. If you're missing an arm and a leg, you belong in this category. If something's not, if you know, in my case, like for example, I'm not missing anything, right? I have all my limbs, but my right arm doesn't work like it's supposed to. Well, there's a space for me, right? um and so, you know, I think that's really important, is like, even if you don't look, you know, even if you don't look impaired, you can still feel like you maybe don't belong in your sport. There's probably a space for you. So
What advice would you give people that are looking to represent a national team, whether it's Team USA or Canada?
I think the most important thing is to like find someone in your sport who has done it and ask them questions. That's what I did. Right. That was really, honestly, that was Samantha Bosco and Chris Murphy, those two individuals. I asked them a lot of questions, and um, and you know, if there's an impaired cyclist listening to this, like, you know, contact me if you have questions. If I don't have the answers, I'll point you in the right direction. Um, but yeah, I think there's you need to find a little bit of a mentor in your sport, because the best mentor you're going to get is someone who's done it, not just from coaches and directors and staff. Like, they're going to point you in the right direction, but you need to know someone who knows the ins and the outs and the challenges of being an athlete in that sport. So,
That's great advice. Where can my listeners find you at on social media?
Instagram is probably the best way to reach me. My handle is Bryan San, which is BURIANSAN. Um, but yeah, I don't post that often, like photos, but you can reach me. You can message me and stuff like that easily through there.
Thank you again, Bryan Larsen, for your interview, and best of luck in your future in the U.S. Paracycling.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, Bryan Larsen, for your interview, and best of luck in your future.
Thanks.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.